Welcome back to my channel for another Leica episode, and this episode is about the new Summilux-M widest open f1.4 35mm focal length. And people might get confused now because just a few weeks back I reviewed another new Summilux-M 1.4 35, and I will of course clarify why this is a new lens, what's different between this lens and the one I just reviewed. And I also have a bunch of other lenses here in front of me on the table which play a role in my storyline I'm going to tell. Let's kick off the video. Actually, before developing my storyline and explaining what these other lenses have to do with the new Summilux, I want to open the box because I'm quite curious to do that. I have not looked into the box yet because I wanted this to make a live experience on my channel. So I want to open it right away and get my hands on the content inside. And first of all, we have here a pouch. It's not leather, so not as fancy as what you typically get on other Leica M lenses. Then we have some paperwork inside here. It's the usual stuff. We have some information about the lens here, which you probably don't have to read. We have a certificate, like always with Leica M lenses, and the usual brochure on the essentials of photography, which is what Leica stands for. So quite nice. And then we have a box inside here. Let's get this out. And let's open this up. Nicely done. It's a very posh box here. And let's open it. And then first of all, we get here a lens hood. And that is of course nice. It looks quite solid, well built. It's a matte black finish and I like the design. And then if you look inside, we have here another lens hood, which has a different design. I'm going to explain the story about these two lens hoods in a moment. And then we have inside the lens. Here we go. Let's get this open. Beautiful. Like many times with Leica, exceeding my expectations. Of course, I've seen the product photos and had the pre-information about the lens, but this looks really beautiful. And it's also very small, a very compact lens. And if we compare it with the other Summilux-M 1.4 35, which I reviewed a few weeks back, is of course a totally different design. And I'm going to compare the two side by side with the specs, so you will immediately get all the differences and why this new lens also makes sense and has its justified place in the Leica M lens portfolio. Looking at the design of the lens, first of all, we have here a black lens cap, and that is a plastic cap here, and it just slides on and off. And then we have here one of the characteristics of this lens, namely a steel rim. If you look at that, it has a different finish than the rest of the lens, and it's stainless steel. And that steel rim here is a design element coming from the original version of this lens dating back to 1961. So we talk about more than 60 years or 6 decades of history here, and that's of course very nice. And this lens here is the fourth family member of the so-called classic line in the Leica M lens portfolio. So let's have a look into that for a moment. I have now, including the new Summilux 1.4 35, 3 other lenses here in front of me on the table, which all belong to that classic lineup of Leica M lenses. And the first one I wanted to quickly show is this one here. And it's a very small, very compact lens. If you remove here the lens cap, you basically have a very, very small and tiny lens. And it's a lens I use very often, in particular for street photography. For instance, the silver version of this lens here is mounted on my Leica M11 and is very convenient to shoot because its widest open aperture is an f1.4, so you can easily do range and zone focusing with that lens. And that's the Summilux-M widest open f5.6, 28mm. And by the way, 28mm, I've said this so many times on my channel, is a beautiful focal length for street photography. It also comes in a fancy packaging, and it has a very fancy lens hood here in a matte black finish design. And that's the first of the classic lenses in the Leica M portfolio. Another lens which would deserve a review by its own is the Tambar M. And if you look into that, here is a very nice lens. So this is widest open f2.2 and the focal length is 90mm. And that is probably the most dreamy 90mm lens on planet Earth. It comes also in a fancy packaging and with a leather pouch here, which you can open up and can use to transport the lens and protect it. And it also comes with a central aperture for the Tambar M, which creates this beautiful dreamy look for portraits and images which are almost not from this world. The third lens in the classic line for Leica M lenses is the Summilux-M 1.2 50mm, and that is a beautiful lens and also a very dreamy lens, and also one-on-one replicating a design from many years back. And it also comes with a fancy lens hood here and with a nice box, which if you would go to the silver version, which was sold out I think before market start, you could make a lot of money if you own it and sell it, because the price has increased by about a factor of 3 at least. But of course, if you have the silver version of this, you shouldn't sell it because it will increase further, and it's a very special lens. The black one here is the standard version, and that is not so expensive as the silver one, but also has a significant price tag because Noctilux lenses in general are expensive. And that's the third one in this lineup here. And then we have now newly the fourth family member, which is then the Summilux 1.4 35mm. And that is in the same way as the one I showed here in the box. Very compact, very lightweight, a totally different beast than what you have on the Summilux 1.4 35. I reviewed a couple of weeks back, and I think now it's time to look into more elements of the lens, get familiar with it, mount it on different camera bodies, and also compare it side by side with this Summilux-M 35mm, which is an aspherical lens, and that is of course also leading to a higher price tag. So let's have a look at other design elements here. First of all, we have here an aperture ring, and we have also two levers here, so you can use this to turn the aperture ring. Is a very robust, very nice design. Widest open is f1.4, and then you can stop this down all the way to f16, which is the usual range of f-stops you have on Leica M lenses. Then we have here a focus ring, and that has also a lever here, and that focus ring is locked at infinity. I hope you can see this. Locked at infinity, and you have a little button here, and if you push that, then the focus ring is unlocked. So let's do this, and then we can start to focus. And it is a very beautiful focusing mechanism, like always in Leica M lenses. Very smooth, very soft, but sufficient resistance. And the closest focusing distance here is 1 meter. And you see you can go beyond that. So here is now a 1 meter focus adjusted on the scale. You can go beyond that, but I doubt that you can get closer because the spec sheet says 1 meter is the closest focusing distance on this lens. We'll see that in a moment when we compare it with the other Summilux 1.4 35mm. And then we have two different lens hoods here, and one is this one. This is the classic one, and it just clips on. So you put it on here, and then you rotate it, and then it snaps in. Listen to the sound. Did you hear that? Here it snapped in, and then the lens hood is mounted. It's a very beautiful design, very classic, and I will use the lens with this lens hood here because it will look very nice on a chrome finish as well as on a black painted camera body on the Leica M camera system. And then we have another lens hood here, which is this one. And this is more circular designed here, a ventilator design I would say, and you can screw this on. And that is of course convenient because that means we can use filters. So it looks also good, it looks also classic, and you have the option for E46 filters. So let's quickly show this here. So here is a filter. Of course, this is in silver to match the lens finish. Let's get this out. And now I can mount here that filter, and that will protect my glass. And then I can still, of course, screw on the lens hood here. And now you have a filter mounted, and you still have a very fancy, very classic, very nice lens hood mounted on the lens, and that looks pretty beautiful too. But here with this lens hood this will not work because there is no space. You can no longer clip it on. Let's quickly show that here. So if we unmount this lens hood here, then this will no longer fit. If you want to mount this lens hood to the lens, you cannot afford to have a filter in between. So if you want to use a filter, you need to go for this design. And I think it's actually nice that Leica included this in the package because this lens hood here was not there for the original 1961 Summilux-M 1.4 35. Let's quickly have a look how the lens appears if it is mounted on a Leica M11. So this is my chrome version of the Leica M11 here. And as I said, there is another classic lens, the Summilux 5.6-28, currently mounted. So let's unmount this lens and let's replace it by the new Summilux lens. Careful. All right, here we go. And then we have the usual red dot to match here on the camera body, and then it snaps on. Very compact too, almost in the same way as what we had on the Summilux here, and looks really nice. Have a look here. This looks really good. Let's get the lens cap off and let's clip on the lens hood here. Snapping in. I want the Leica camera Wetzlar to be on top of that. Here actually it snaps in. There is an alignment between this red dot here and that spare out on the lens hood, and that's where it snaps in. See? And then it looks really nice. Very classic, and of course matches nicely the finish in chrome on the camera body, but it also fits black camera bodies. And for seeing this, I want to quickly mount this on the new Leica M6. And if you have not seen my review on the Leica M6 and my comparison to the old Leica M6, then you can look this up later. I will post the link in the info box. So let's mount it on a black camera body and let's have a look how this looks like. This also looks very nice. And typically you wouldn't mount a chrome finish lens on a black camera body, but since there is this design element with the black lens hood, it actually looks really nice and really classy. Very nice. I like a lot the optical appearance of that lens. And I think now it's time to compare that Summilux-M 1.4 35 with the Summilux-M 1.4 35 aspherical. And I will do this side by side so that in a couple of minutes you have all the data points you might want to know. Here are the spec sheets of the two Summilux 35mm f1.4 lenses, and on the left hand side we have the classic one, which we just unboxed. On the right hand side we have the aspherical version of it, which I reviewed a couple of weeks back. And the price tag of the two lenses is different. The classic one is substantially cheaper for $3,900, whereas the aspherical lens costs about $5,400. And the reason is that aspherical lens elements are typically more expensive, but they also improve the optical properties of the lens. The angle of view on both lenses is exactly the same, is a 35mm field of view on a full frame sensor or 35mm film if you mount this on a Leica M6 for instance, or Leica MP, but in the lens system we see differences. And the classic one on the left hand side has 7 lenses in 5 groups, whereas the aspherical lens has 9 lenses in 5 groups. And we also have this aspherical surface incorporated in the right hand side lens, of course. And then we have also differences in the minimum focusing distance, whereas the left hand side, the classic one, has the usual 1 meter as closest focusing distance and then to infinity, of course. On the right hand side, as I pointed out in my recent video, this new Summilux-M 35 1.4 aspherical lens has a closest focusing distance of 0.4 meter and also a higher reproduction ratio or magnification ratio of 1 divided by 8.9, whereas on the left hand side on the classic lens we only have 1 divided by 26.3. So the classic lens, which I just unboxed, will not help you if you want to do close-up shots. We also see differences in the aperture, and first of all they both can go as wide as f1.4 and can be stopped down to f16. That's common on Leica M lenses, but the number of aperture plates on the classic lens are 10, whereas on the aspherical lens on the right hand side they have been improved from the former version of this aspherical Summilux from 9 blades to 11 blades, and that clearly makes an even softer background bokeh and is very nice. But 10 to 11, whether that makes a big difference, I'll find out when I shoot the new classic lens, which I have not done yet because I just unboxed it. Then on the mount side we have of course Leica M mount. On the filter thread we also have the same, it's E46, but where we have differences is in the lens hood. And I showed it in my video on the right hand side aspherical lens that this is a lens hood which you can screw out and is assembled and mounted to the lens body. Whereas on the left hand side we just saw we get 2 versions of a lens hood, one to screw on and one to clip on, and the one to screw on is also capable of allowing you a filter in the size of E46. Then we have differences in the dimensions. We saw that when I had both lenses in my hands, and we also have a different weight. So on the left hand side the classic one has less weight with 200 gram and a bit more if you mount the lens hood, whereas on the right hand side we have about 338 gram, so that lens is not only bigger, it's also heavier. On Leica's website you find that this lens should replicate the optical behavior and the image impression from that lens back then in 1961. And they also speak about the true king of bokeh, which this lens should represent based on unique vignetting and background blurriness. And I got curious, and although I have to shoot this lens outside, I was taking quickly a couple of shots in the studio. When I mounted the lens on the Leica M11 and switched the camera on, I got a message on the backside LCD that this is an uncoded lens. So I quickly looked up at Leica website that I need a firmware update, which is now 1.5.0.1, and that actually did the trick. So if you have not updated your camera, don't be disappointed if the 6-bit optical decoding for recognizing the lens in the M11 is not working. You need to switch to the newest firmware update, otherwise there will be errors in metadata when it comes to the recognition of the lens. And here's a couple of shots I took on the left hand side, the classic Summilux, on the right hand side the aspherical Summilux, and these images were taken widest open at f1.4. Don't get confused by an f1.7 in the metadata. That's always wrong and only a second guess with Leica M cameras and Leica M lenses. Same shooting parameters, 1/125 seconds, base ISO of 64. And if we look into that and zoom in to 100%, you see both images are kind of sharp on the face, and I really was focusing in the best possible way here, but the left-hand side on the classic Summilux is very, very soft, whereas on the aspherical Summilux lens on the right-hand side, you see pinpoint sharp where the focus was sitting. And if you look at the background blurriness, it's also a little bit different, not too much, of course. Let's have a look here. Let's look a little bit in the background. You see that this is shot widest open, and you also see that there is a slightly different color tone coming in on the left-hand side compared to the right-hand side, although the shooting parameters on the Leica M11 camera body were exactly the same. Stopping them down to f2.8, again, ignore the aperture here in metadata. Both images here are shot at an f2.8. Same parameters, 1/30 seconds, still base ISO 64. Then the softness of the face is gone. Both images, the classic one on the left hand side and the aspherical one on the right hand side, show the same clarity and sharpness on the face. So if you stop down by a couple of stops, you basically get the same sharpness on the much cheaper lens than what you have on the aspherical Summilux. You still see some difference in coloring, and I would also say, astonishingly enough, that the aspherical Summilux on the right hand side now has a bit more elevated vignetting than what we see on the classic Summilux on the left hand side. But you know, as I said, I need to gain more experience with that new lens. I've shot only in the studio these 2 frames here, nothing else so far, so let me come back when I collected more images and can show more what the differences of these lenses are and how images in general in real life, if you go out and shoot, appear with the new classic Summilux 1.4-35. Switching back to the 2 images shot widest open at f1.4, there's one more observation I had, which you only see here in the frame. And if you look here, you see that this background light here, which is a reflection from the camera body, is more circular. Still not perfectly circular, but more circular on the right hand side on the Summilux-M aspherical than what it is on the classic version on the left hand side. And that could be due to the fact that you have on the aspherical Summilux 11 aperture plates and on the classic Summilux only 10 aperture plates. But as I already said, I need to shoot this new classic Summilux lens outside to collect more data points and gain more experience about how these images really get across if I shoot widest open, if I stop down, and so on. Summarizing what we just saw, we have a new family member of the classic line from Leica, the Summilux 1.4-35mm. And there are differences between this less expensive lens and the aspherical Summilux-M 35mm f1.4. You saw it if you shoot these widest open, then clearly here the aspherical lens and the more expensive lens is superior and gives you not this dreamy soft look. But having said that, the look we get from this classic Summilux 35mm is intentional, because what Leica wanted is to replicate the classic view coming from a lens more than 60 years back in 1961 in the market, and that's what they did. And I think if you like that, if you are someone who likes dreamy images with a special classy look, you know, and a soft appearance when you shoot the lens widest open, then this lens is my full recommendation. If you prefer to have also widest open, a more technically clean image, still dreamy, still very soft in the background bokeh, but pinpoint sharp where the focus is sitting, then you need to spend a bit more money and go for the aspherical version, which is not the classic one and has also a totally different appearance. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.